The folder is real. A sealed manila jacket, stamped with a declassification mark, waits under a single desk lamp. Follow me through it, page by page. The memorandum inside was dated the 13th of March, 1962, barely 2 months before its authors expected Cuba to fall. Its title left nothing to the imagination: Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba. The document was signed by General Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and addressed to Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. Inside it sat 6 operations, proposed in cold procedural language, later gathered under a single code name: Operation Northwoods. It is a thought experiment built on a real, declassified page. The only honest question is what would have followed if John Kennedy had signed it instead of refusing. Imagine for a moment that signature landing at the bottom of the page. One man's pen and 6 proposed provocations become policy. What would have moved first is not an army. It is the truth a government owes its people, spent to sell the war before a single shot is fired. Every operation on these pages runs the same way. First, an incident staged, then a lie built on top of it. That is the load this one folder was built to carry, and it is why these 6 proposals still matter today. Read it the way an engineer reads a failure report: the load calculated, the breaking point known before the first crack. To understand what one signature might have set loose, start where the document itself starts, with a ship that was meant to sink. Operation 1, the quietest of the 6, begins with a ship. The memorandum proposed blowing up an American ship moored in Guantanamo Bay, then laying the wreck at Cuba's feet. The planners even reached for the old rallying cry, "Remember the Maine." Remember the ship that sank in Havana Harbor in 1898 and dragged a nation into war on a rumor? 64 years later, on paper, they proposed to arrange the rumor themselves. Read the proposal plainly, and the mechanics are almost bureaucratic. A U.S. Navy ship at anchor, floodlights on the harbor fence, a hull opened from the inside at dusk. Then the casualty lists, printed for newspapers that would never learn the truth. The document does not flinch from the word it needs, and neither should we. An American ship lost, staged so a war could be justified over the bodies. Now weigh the same choice here: a harbor emptied of one ship so a war could be filled with a reason. Had Kennedy signed this one, the first thing to move would not have been a fleet. It is a headline. The war would have its reason before the fighting began, and the country would never learn that reason was staged. And that is the tell of this whole folder. The ship was the smallest of the 6, the one meant to draw the least blood, and already it asked a country to grieve for a lie. If the quietest provocation begins with a staged funeral, the louder ones are waiting further down the page. Operation 2 sits a page below the ship, and it trades a harbor for the open sky. Where the first provocation asked a nation to grieve for sailors, this one reached for an ordinary passenger plane, the kind of family boards without a thought. Read the mechanics, and they are almost clerical. A real airliner, registered and known, is quietly swapped for an identical unmanned drone in the same colors. The manned plane lands in secret. The drone flies the published route, broadcasts a distress call, then is destroyed by remote off the Florida Straits, where no survivor could ever contradict it. Follow this operation one step further down the same page. Signed instead of refused, what moves is not a missile, but a story about who fired first. The document leaves no room to guess at intent. It proposed faking the destruction of a civilian airliner. Operation 3 lies 2 pages beneath the airliner. The folder stops pointing at ships and skies and turns toward a city. American streets, American shopfronts, a night like any other in Miami. The plan even sketched real terror on American soil. Bombings proposed for Miami and for Washington itself, blamed on Cuban agents. A blast on a home street corner. Then a printed story naming the enemy who was meant to be there and never was. Set this operation against the two before it, and the pattern sharpens. Signed rather than refused, the memorandum builds its chain a link at a time. First, a bomb, then a name for the bomber, then anger given to a public that was told exactly whom to hate, then a war, waiting at the far end of that anger, already justified before it began. The fear was engineered as fuel, designed to burn the moment the war it was built for needed lighting. Each provocation on this page has grown one step closer to home. A ship at anchor, a plane over the water, and now a corner where ordinary people walk. Operation 4 sits at the top of the second half of the list, and it lifts its eyes from the street corner to the seat of the government itself. The target named on this page is Washington. But this page is colder than the others. It asks the Capitol's own defenders to bloody the Capitol itself. It proposed a campaign of terror aimed at Washington, mock funerals for casualties that were never real, grief staged for the cameras, and harassment on American streets dressed up to look like Havana's agents already walking among us. The enemy invented, then blamed. This is the first operation that turns the country's fear against its own front door. Said ran, "This stays the thought experiment," and the design points at the Capitol its own guardians were sworn to hold. The order would fall to the very officers charged with defending Washington, asked to wound the city they guard. The very power sworn to defend the Capitol would instead be turned against the people it answered to. 4 provocations on the count now, and the folder is only halfway open. The 5th provocation was already waiting further down the same page. Operation 5 turns the page again. The target is no longer a place on the map. It is a people. The kind of people the memorandum was written to protect. Cuban refugees who had already fled Castro's island for the United States. Here, the document proposes something colder than a bombing. It describes staged incidents against those refugees, arranged to look like Havana reaching across the water. A boat sinking on the way to Florida with real Cuban exiles aboard. Harassment made to appear as if the enemy were hunting its own escapees on American soil. The refugee, having already run once, would be turned into the proof that running was never enough. Weigh the refusal here one more time at the coldest page in the folder. None of this was ever done, only proposed, then refused. Sign it, and the chain the memorandum drew starts to move. First, an overturned lantern, then the grieving families photographed, then a nation shown that the enemy would murder even the people it had already driven out, and a public taught to want the war that answer demanded. The document names the very people it claims to shield as the material for the wound. 5 provocations counted now, and one heavier page waits beneath. Operation 6 is the last page in the folder, and the worst. Here, the folder stops counting single incidents and describes a war. The memorandum proposed all of them at once: ship, plane, city, refugees, one coordinated design to make a country look already under attack. One folder, one purpose. A pretext large enough to justify a full-scale invasion of Cuba. And the whole design still sits where it was drafted, going no further than the page it was typed on. If Kennedy had signed, the whole machine would have run to its end. The provocations, the reports filed as proof, and the war they were built to demand. But that machine never started. Kennedy read it and rejected it outright. The plan never left the page. Within months, Lemnitzer was moved out of the Joint Chiefs into a NATO command overseas, his career quietly redirected. What the memorandum could not answer is the question just beyond it, whether a war planned this carefully needs its own paper at all. Kennedy's refusal should have been the end of it, but the twist at the bottom of this file is that Northwoods was never needed. Barely 2 years later, in August of 1964, the disputed Gulf of Tonkin incident did the job, and Congress passed the Tonkin Resolution almost unanimously. For a moment, the parallel looks exact, but the comparison is incomplete. Northwoods was a plan, drafted and refused. Tonkin was an event, disputed to this day, with no memorandum proving it was staged. The plan stayed sealed for 3 decades, until the 1992 JFK Records Act. James Bamford brought it to wide attention in Body of Secrets. One signature, 2 divergent paths, and only one of them was ever tried. So the question is yours in the comments. If the pretext can surface without the plan, does refusing to sign ever really stop it? The plan stayed on the page, refused and shelved, exactly where a country's own defenders once left it. This is the Impossible Archive, where history and the impossible meet.